Hey guys, so wanted to record a quick video here. Um, just a couple of things I wanted to share with anybody that might need to hear it or might benefit from hearing it. Um, it's effectively revolving around the idea of trusting destiny to get a sense of peace. Because I think a lot of the frameworks and ways of thinking and ways of our current society and all the parts of our society condition people to think, it almost robs us of peace. If we are fully in tune with society and what it tells us and unconsciously navigating our life in that manner, then it's almost like a guarantee we're going to be missing peace that we could otherwise have. So that's why it's so important to me because, myself, I've struggled with it. People I love, I see struggling with it. So I wanted to share this in case it can help anybody else have an easier time while we're here on Earth and also be a little, open up our capacity uh, to apply the energy that we have into, more in more intentional ways rather than the conditioning that we are kind of incentivized to go along with. um so all that to say, I wanted to start with the idea of the window of tolerance and how it can go into dysregulation in both ways as it gets toward hyperarousal or hypoarousal. um I also wanted to kind of talk about the stuff specific to neurodivergent minds and, people with trauma and stuff. Because, you know, maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know everyone's experience with trauma. I honestly think sometimes the body's conditioning can be, it can be a lot to navigate through. And I wonder if there are some cases where you just can't. And the body is just always going to be having a rough time. But that doesn't mean that we have to have a conscious, subjective experience of a rough time, even if our body is dysregulated or moving into these unpleasant states. And that's pretty much what I wanted to be talking about. Um, so, speaking of the emotional states, I found this scale. There's a lot of ones that are similar to it, but it's like I wanted to talk mostly about the attitude scale, where, as if we think about a day as a trajectory over time, right? When we're at these levels of attitude, it's kind of like, we're hanging out at one, maybe, then it'll dip down, then it'll go back, you know. But the thing is we can only feel as good as what we can access with our attitudes. And this I wanted to kind of compare, I guess, draw a correlation between the spiral dynamics and integral theory kind of thinking. Because, this stuff is basically just a way to analyze thinking. So, of course, the way you're thinking will correlate with your attitude, which will correlate with this and, every part of your life, really. Um, so I wanted to talk about it. I also found this one that's like a little bit less stuff because this has a lot of stuff to go to look at. But specifically, I wanted to kind of point out how over here, the orange and amber, and even some green is kind of where we're at in our current society. And if you look at, here, let me zoom in a bit. If you look down at the orange bit here, they're talking about some of the identity crises that can go along with it. environmental consumerism, identity, work addiction, hyperfixation, you know, over identification with roles. Even, even some down here people struggling with like impulsiveness that is kind of like a knee jerk kind of transition to these unpleasant places, right? You know, I just was thinking it kind of correlated interestingly. So, you know, I think there needs to be a degree of introspection with how we're thinking to start with, not in a diagnosing way or something's wrong with me way, but like curious about ourselves, like, hey, where am I at right now? You got to see where your 2 feet are planted and then see where you're going. Um, so the reason I say that is because a lot of this stuff is conditioned, right? It's programming from society, from our families, from our experiences. So if we're not consciously analyzing that, then that's conditioning is just going on. We just accept it as a fact of life when really it's not even grounded in reality. It's just grounded in judgments that we've drawn from society, our family, our experiences, right? And that's the thing. Our society is pretty kind of sick, right? In some ways. Like right here, it's kind of stuck. Material wealth, pleasures, civilization. This one over here. Follow rules, don't step out of line, control yourself or others through faith and discipline. These are, there's a lot more kind of ways of thinking. So I feel like, if you're getting stuck down here, you're also kind of getting stuck down here. So that's all well and good, right? Okay. So what is the significance of that with fostering peace and being okay with our destiny, right? Because honestly, so far it doesn't even seem like they correlate, right? Um, but my argument is, even if you're in these dysregulated states, even if whatever's going on, if you equip yourself with a framework that works for you to tap into these attitudes, which this is why this is so helpful, because I think looking up to these things and then relating them back to these can be very helpful, just as we've related them down here to down here. Um, then no matter what's going on in the external, we can always tap into these things and just have more peace. And ultimately, trust the trajectory of our lives, no matter how it looks, really, even if it wasn't up to our expectations, whatever. We can, naturally, our bodies are going to feel. We're going to experience this stuff. Depending on our window of tolerance, it might be, we can tolerate more before we get there or less, depending on what, factors. But it'll happen. But what I'm saying is we don't have to allow the occurrences to take our peace. And the only reason that it is happening, or not the only reason, but a reason that is, avoidable, is kind of with regard to this input from the environment. So, just the external, or even just our own bodies, right? Even our own bodies getting into these states is still an input that our conscious self, subjective experiences, right? And the thing that I wanted to talk about here is like those things go in, they influence the emotional state and behavior naturally. Right here is huge, I think. The internal representation of reality. I would argue that this is kind of where these things are crystallizing and either leading to less desirable outcomes in regard to having peace or more dysregulation or you know, in spite of the dysregulation, getting to these points and not just being able to be up here. And I think it's from taking these external things, including our own body and mind. Like, I don't mean to say like external, like only in the material world. It's like these things that are just not our conscious awareness, things that our conscious awareness are subject to, and then assigning judgments to them, be it assumptions or fears or expectations, whatever, and then insisting upon those things instead of accepting destiny for what it is and accepting our physiology and our brains and the way they're wired, how they are in the moment, and not resisting them, even if they're unpleasant, which sounds not easy. And I would certainly understand, you know, I'm not trying to say you can just think your way out of a situation. Like, I'm saying it can be unpleasant, and then we can still foster peace in spite of it, by letting go of these judgments. Because in that's the thing about humans, right? We can't ever think objectively in reality. We can only create, um what's the word? I'm drawing a blank. um I guess what I was trying to say is, like, we can't analyze reality as it's happening. We can only like react to it based on, oh, it's rationalized. Yeah, we can only rationalize what's going on. We can't ever really truly observe it. So we're rationalizing our own responses also. We're rationalizing like everything. And that's another thing. Like, if we're going through life not thinking about how our brains feel like we're completely in the right and understanding everything, but we're really just rationalizing stuff based on the frameworks that we have available to us, which, are informed by these things, which is programming and stuff we have to almost go out of our way to improve, which then influence this. That's like a pretty big kind of dichotomy between how we'll be feeling, because it's going to be conscious or unconscious, right? And then when it is made conscious, then we can intentionally interact with how we're rationalizing things. And I think that is where we're getting powerful, kind of approaches to tap into these kind of really nice, pleasant states, right? That here it says they recharge and refresh. We gain energy from just having good emotional things. So our literal trajectory of our day, the capacity of our day increases just because we're able to have these things. And in this example just says, wow, this is fascinating. I'm alive and learning. In the stable zone, it says, thank goodness, here this comes for my healing. In the negative area, that you would the attitude is, oh no, not again. And then there's real bad stuff down there, where people are moved to inaction or complete hyperarousal or hypoarousal, right? And again, not saying that's like bad or good. That's just reality. That's just we're having chemical reactions to external stuff, and it's based on our internal representation of reality, or what we're insisting on. So, huge stuff, important. But now the question might arise, like, okay, we have that identified. So how do we start working up, right? How do we get to these other areas? So I've been interested in spiral dynamics and integral theory for a long time. I think at least since 2018, when my friend ran it by me. Big shout out. um, and you know, I'm sure it's a natural response when people encounter this stuff is trying to analyze exactly where we are, right? You know, in society, you look at all that stuff and kind of seeing the positives and negatives of all the things. Um, I'm drawing a blank on what exactly the different term was for the second tier. See how they have these split up first tier, then second tier, third tier. So the first tier, the highest you can get is this hippie kind of equality for everyone, but kind of can't account for nuance ish kind of assumption. Radical relativism is what it says over here. Rules over a single system view. It's cool. And of course, like these are easy to understand because that's the frameworks we exist in, right? But then when you're getting up into the second tier and then this unity tier, it's a little. When I was first encountering it, it was a little confusing to me, right? Kind of trying to understand exactly what sets it apart, I guess. To me, this integral area is where you're really starting to look at reality as it is without any of these assumptions from down here. Because these things are informed by assumptions. This thing right here is informed by, all right, real material conditions. I guess like dialectics. It's mastering kind of historical materialism, dialectical materialism, and ideas like that. I think is fair to say. Integral is more so seeing the world just as it is to me, I think. Let's kind of read what it's saying over here. Universal principles identifies as the story that the self tells itself about itself, using experiences as words. Look at how intentions attempt to manifest themselves through the self. You know, self. It's interesting, kind of introspective thing, useful to understand, right? Um, I think it's also cool. They say peace in a world without answers. That's neat. And then beyond that is unitive. Let's read what this one says. Realizes oneness, exhibits wisdom, joy, and love, seen in saints and sages throughout history, theoretical and aspirational. So, reading this, honestly, I think it kind of leads you astray, and I promise it's related to this stuff. I'm gonna connect it in a moment. But yeah, its focus, it describes it here as observing, understanding, protecting, and honoring, and allowing all beings and phenomena. So this is like, you know, when I was talking about the judgments thing, this is like seeing reality without the judgments. Because this one's still seeing judgments, but like understanding with the judgments, I guess, instead of like having it come from an assumption or a framework. It's like reality becomes the framework. This is just seeing like it is it is what it is, but like not in a I don't know how to explain it too well. It's anyway though, I think it directly correlates to this stuff. In fact, they even talk about it right here. Peace, metaness, abundance, gratitude, trust, you know, these are all things that go along with ideas of oneness like that. and observation without perspective and stuff. So let me try to read through here again. Let's see. Awareness of various conscious processes. So it takes into account all this other stuff too, which is cool. Non-exclusively aware of multiple parts of ego. So really, really unpacking this. Capable compassion for the process of development itself. Huge, extremely important, right? I think it's literally necessary for healing if we really want to address stuff like this and just have a better time on Earth. Like, we need that. That's something we need, which is why I want to make this video, because people, I think it helps people when they encounter that. And I wanted to talk about how we can get into these states, how we can get into this stuff. Because, again, like I was saying, you look at this stuff, seen in saints and sages throughout history, theoretical and aspirational, it makes it seem like it's like, oh, it's just a concept. Oh, it's just something we're throwing out there that it's hard to conceptualize. And for me, for years, like I was saying, I've been into this for a while. For a while, it was kind of difficult to think about these kinds of things because, they're not like what we're really used to. And especially with the way that this one's described, it's like, what does that actually mean? Oneness and all that. But I've recently been looking into like different frameworks for analyzing, I guess, reality and how we're interacting with it, like non-duality and Taoism. And pretty insightful. Non-duality, I think, once you really get it, and I don't even want to say that I really get it yet, but I think it's like I get it enough to know that it can be helpful in this regard. One, from like, even just from a matter, from a scientific, completely not even really super spiritual perspective, but just looking at the non-dual nature of our existence alone, right? There was some sort of event that kicked off superheated stuff that turned into stars, that turned into planets, that turned into specifically a planet that had the capability for life on Earth. And for this planet's whole existence, it has all the elements needed on it to facilitate life over time, culminating in our experiences and our bodies and everything we will ever use in this life. Like, to me, when you're looking at it like that and realizing it's all made of the same stuff, right? It's all atoms, it's all stuff from stars. We're all all life is kind of the same in that sense. We're all using or receiving consciousness. We're conscious beings that are inside a body that got conditioned. It's not like that we are the conditioning, it's that our body just happened to get conditioned, not really for any real reason. It just happened, right? It's kind of like that Albert Camus absurdist kind of argument. There's not really a reason that we were born into the conditions we were at the time we were, and we're subject to the things that we are. But because of that, we get to, because we're inherently creative beings, we can apply our consciousness and our attention to being creative with regard to everything. Everything we can conceptualize, right? It's really awesome. It's really freeing to think that way, I think. And darn it, I'm losing my train of thought. I guess that it like gives us the freedom to choose how to have a life. it gets it gives us the freedom to choose. Maybe, we have these spicy brains, we have this trauma, we have this stuff. It's conditioning that we have to deal with. It might mess with our systems, but yet we also at the same time have this creativity and ability to apply our attention and creativity to the trajectory of our life and how it'll go. And it can become intentional. And this process can become intentional. And that's why I mentioned all this stuff, this unitive and these kind of, the dialectics kind of ways of thinking, because it helps, in my humble opinion, helps facilitate these kinds of things so you can be operating from these emotions. And then when you're operating from the emotions, you're having a better time, right? And the quicker and easier you can tap into them by like having certain exercises, whatever works best for you, right? I was just explaining the way I think about it, but there's certainly more to non-duality and Taoism or Taoism, pardon, and stuff like that. Um, and kind of connecting the destiny thing is that with regard to the Big Bang, with regard to the development of the stars and the planets and life, it's like all this stuff is kind of just being orchestrated long before we were a concept, right? And it'll keep happening long after. All the elements in our body will keep circulating just as they were circulating to make us. So we can trust in this kind of universal oneness kind of process of life that we are, you know, and just be like, all right, we get this life. We don't have to insist on anything in it. There's really no reason to. There's societal constructs, like that we kind of have to get food. We have to play along. We have to insist to get food, to get shelter, whatever. But that's just our physical body. Our consciousness, we can do this stuff while accounting for that, I guess. um if that makes sense. And like, yeah, like with non-duality, with recognizing that truth that like, we're all made of the same stuff and are the same stuff and might even all have the same consciousness, and might not know as many things as we think we do, which is again another thing with this. We have big egos in our current culture, right? We insist on a lot of things, that things should be one way or another, when we might not even understand stuff. A cool example I encountered a while ago was like the cells in a hand don't know it's making up a hand. They literally have no frame of reference to even conceptualize that, right? So like, think about our thinking in regard to like the universe as a whole, or the trajectory of time and what's going on. Like we're just a instance that gets to exist because of these conditions, and that's really as deep as it is. Everything else we get to assign. We might be subject to things that also exist, but we get to assign the judgments to those things. And that's where I think the freedom and the peace comes from, because if we're stuck over here, or even if we're stuck in places that are lower, I guess. I don't really like that term, but then we're going to apply that stuff into our internal representation of reality in here, our judgments. It's going to be informed by these things, by fear, shame, hopelessness. Whereas we master getting to these states, then we can put them in here and we can make judgments from the point of serenity, joy, enthusiasm, trust. I think trust is just the biggest one. We can trust the universe, trust time. Just be like, all right, it'll work out. It's we get to live. you know, gratitude, even if we have trauma, even if we have spicy brains, neurodivergent kind of frameworks that, with regard to societal stuff, like the stuff is limiting, right? I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Um, Despite that stuff, we can still find gratitude and be like, okay, body, you might not be perfectly wired for this society. I'm so thankful for you anyway. You're just trying to keep me safe, right? All this stuff is the brain and chemistry inside of it trying to keep you safe. It doesn't know that it's creating a unpleasant subjective experience. It's just doing patterns. It's just understanding stuff the way it knows how to, and then we have to experience that for better or worse. And that's the thing. If we're approaching that from a gratitude, from a good, from up here, we can approach it for better. If we're approaching it from down here, we're approaching it for worse, for our subjective experience, right? I really don't like using terms like better and worse. Just I don't know. I feel like it's kind of doing that judgment thing when really it's just a scenario. What I guess I can say peace or lack of peace. um but yeah, I wanted to end with this little graphic. It reads, you get to discover again and again there are no colors that do not fit on your path. Eventually, all of it helps you on your way to that bigger, magnificent version of who you really are. And I just thought it was pretty cool, kind of with regard to all this stuff. Um, Also, I just remembered I totally forgot to mention the destiny thing, like more specifically. But that was kind of when I was talking about, trusting time, trusting the universe, trusting the planet. The planet, like, wouldn't give us the ability to be alive, I think, if it, you know, if we weren't supposed to be, right? Like, I see it, like, kind of like as a, I don't know. I think that's a place where human judgment just fails. Because, like, how can we understand something like the universe, really? How can we apply a judgment to it? But it's here, and we can recognize the miracle that is, and how crazy it is, and be grateful that we get to participate in it, and trust that that destiny is what it is, right? It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things how things go. It matters our subjective experiences, which are dependent on how things go. I'm not trying to just, I feel like this toes a very fine line between, like, oh, you can just think your way out of it. But I hope it I hope it's making sense and all that, not sounding too up its own butt. But just trusting destiny in that way. Um and trusting, I guess, ourselves too, that even if we're dealing with tough stuff, that we can, you know, have things come up for healing and get to a place where we are fascinated by being alive and learning. Because I think also if we're doing that every day, then this stuff kind of has a harder time getting to you, right? It's like almost you're building a barrier against these more difficult emotions, and you're increasing your window of tolerance, right? This article here is actually pretty cool in that regard, talking about building resilience, widening the window of tolerance. Um I guess so that is everything I wanted to talk about. Uh reading that made me think of one more thing, is just understanding how our brains work too, like what makes us go to these things. Because again, when we rationalize things, we feel like we're right? Like say somebody cuts us off in traffic and like we just are ticked off or something, like we feel like we're in the right. um I guess a better example is like with regard to trauma. Like, say you're exposed to something that reminds your physiology of something that was traumatic, even though now it's not a threat, you respond, you have a subjective experience of it being a threat and it's unpleasant, right? Um, understanding how the amygdala has a role in that, how the prefrontal cortex should be in charge of that, but then in these scenarios, like the amygdala is kind of going overbearing, and just understanding that kind of stuff too, and then adding that to the tool belt of tools that you have to rationalize situations and create these judgments, because we have to do that anyway, right? We're always going to be creating judgments. We're always going to be creating thoughts because that's what we do. We can rationalize things. That's it. So might as well do it in an intentional, productive, constructive, and loving, serene way, right? We get a choice of what one of these things is used when we're rationalizing. And the state we're at is how we're going to rationalize stuff. At least that's how I see things. um, so I don't know. Super important in my humble opinion, of having peace and all that. I feel like there was more I wanted to say in that regard, but I'm drawing a blank again, and I've tried to wrap it up like twice now, so I figure I might as well do it. Anyway, thank you so much if you watched this all the way through. I hope it was helpful, and I'm looking forward to making some more videos. Um, Let me know what concepts y'all might want looked at or explained, because again, fostering peace is like my big thing. I'm an optimist about that. I think we can foster peace in many departments, despite the world being so at odds with that idea. And I want to help people do it because, like this graph says, the more you're in this area, the more energy you have, then the more capability we have to direct our attention in constructive, productive ways and loving ways to ourselves and our neighbors, and to put our energy toward making the world a better place, because it's a desperate need, and it's if we're going to address the climate crisis, right, we have to be able to put some energy into stuff, into building new frameworks, you know, which is also, this stuff's really awesome for too. um but yeah, it's really important to me that people have the ability to actualize their potential and do, give the earth everything they can, because the earth gave us everything it could. We might as well return the favor and do it for our neighbors, because if everyone's doing it for everyone else, then we're all good. Anyway, thank you again. Take care, and best wishes to everyone.